Welcome to ASM Connected, the podcast brought to you by ASM Technologies. Across the series, we chat with guests about all things emerging technology, what innovation means to them, and how organisations can ride the wave as technology continues to disrupt the way we work. In this episode, Ian Tompkinson chats with Bruce Daisley, who is a two-time Sunday Times bestseller with his books The Joy of Work and Fortitude, podcaster and ex-Twitter VP, about resilience and happiness at work and how emerging tech and social media impacts workplace culture. Bruce was previously a VP of EMEA for Twitter, Managing Director of Twitter UK, Director of YouTube and Display for Google, Digital Advisor to Comic Relief, and has held various other roles in technology. Bruce is also a seasoned podcaster with his podcast Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat.
Thanks, Bruce, for joining us today. Much appreciated and great to have you on the show.
My pleasure. I'm glad to be here.
Great. Thanks for taking the time out to join us. So a bit of, I suppose, an outline plan for today. Thanks for joining us for the chat. And we're going to cover off a number of topics all around sort of connected to innovation, emerging tech. And then we're going to get into your favourite subject, what makes us happy at work and resilience at work as well, which is going to be an interesting subject. Something that I know is very topical for businesses these days. So in terms of, I suppose, just easing us into the episode and heading into there, with your background, you've obviously spent a lot of time working for some extremely well-known large corporate businesses, particularly around looking at your roles within Twitter and YouTube. When I look at other companies such as Facebook and Google, they've predominantly bought their scale. You know, they were very successful at their first find and their first go-to-market plan, but they've kind of bought that scale. I believe Twitter's got a different backstory, which I just wondered if you could, for the audience, share us that backstory, please.
Yeah. So look, the origin story of Twitter is that, it was created by Jack Dorsey. It was sort of generated from the remnants of a podcasting firm. A couple of the founders of Twitter had created Blogger, and they'd sold it to Google for, I think, $100 million. And so they were thinking, okay, with blogging represented the democratization of one form of publishing, how about podcasting is another? They set up this podcasting platform, very much trying to replicate it. What they discovered was that while it was sort of gradually growing, Apple integrated podcasting into the iPod technology. When the iPod came about, it's hard to imagine now, the sort of precursor to the iPhone. But there was no software to put your own music on there. So there were third-party softwares to do that. So they created that. Overnight, Apple had destroyed their business model. So they set about trying to create a hack week to keep the team busy while they tried to sell the remnants of the company. And the hack week they came up with was that this way to update your friends by sending a text message to a central website that would then text all of your mates. So it was like this sort of hub of text messages. So you'd send your text message to a short code. And so Twitter was that, really. So, when it first started, it didn't have a mobile app. In fact, someone else bought it and Twitter bought it off them. It didn't really have a lot of the things that you might associate with it now. So it's just an illustration that sometimes the thing that gets you going is just the root of a good idea and the ability to develop and adapt it as you go along, really.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating because I say, most organizations these days, they have they're a one-hit wonder. They grow, they scale around that technology or that idea, and then they sort of veer acquisition, bolt other bits on. And the fact that I suppose they've gone on and actually taken themselves away and said, how do we build the next company? That's quite unique, isn't it? Is that a cultural thing, do you think?
Yeah. I mean, you have to say, shout out to Jack Dorsey, because after he was at Twitter for about 3 or 4 years from the start, then he got fired and he went off and he set up another multi-billion-dollar company in the form of Square. It's now called Block. But yeah, so he went off and did it twice. And, if you're ever looking for a billionaire who's done it twice, everyone always thinks Elon Musk runs SpaceX and Tesla, but he bought Tesla. And I think he actually bought a lot of the basis of SpaceX. So albeit that we might associate it with Elon Musk with doing it twice, in fact, Jack Dorsey was the original.
Yeah, and Elon Musk and Twitter are very entwined at the moment, which we'll come back to a
Mm.
bit later on. But yeah, there's an interesting story there. One of the things that I was quite interested to sort of understand your take was I saw a keynote that you've done on YouTube, and you would talk about on YouTube about YouTube. I must get that clear for the audience as well. And you did basically given the audience, and it was a live one in person, and you give them these foghorns and handed them out, and you were looking at the way that advertising worked within YouTube. It was quite an innovative approach, and I really got it. And the approach to how YouTube looked at advertising was quite unique. I must admit, the fact that the user basically, if they don't like the adverts, I think they don't get paid, or it works along that format. Are decisions like that, from your experience, are they data led, or is that creativity led to start off with?
Yeah, Skipper Lads on YouTube was solving a problem that right at the outset, it's hard to rewind the clock and believe this now, but right at the outset, a lot of advertisers weren't keen to advertise on content that wasn't created by established names. So, the advent of YouTubers, now we see YouTubers as, these people like they sort of they have millions of followers. They're media outlets in their own right. That some YouTubers do significantly more viewing than the biggest TV shows. At the time, that wasn't the case, and so we needed something that was going to enable advertising to appear against those bits of content. And so we introduced these skippable ads. It was a way to sort of democratize advertising, really. But yeah, it was it was an attempt at the time to introduce a format of advertising that if the person watching didn't want to watch the ad, they didn't, and the advertiser didn't get charged for that. So you know, it was an attempt to try and do something a bit fresh and different.
So it was creativity led then, rather than just looking at constant reams of data, and I suppose the data science of modern day. It was let's approach it differently. And I like the term you used before with when you were looking at when you're talking about Twitter and the hack week. Is it kind of that culture? Is it kind of that sort of idea? Was it looking at that problem and saying let's solve it, or was there a lot of data churning as well?
Yeah, huge amount of data. So effectively, what ad that YouTube chooses to say is based on the anticipated skip rate. And let's work on the basis that three-quarters of the ads are skipped. If you get some ads will be skipped 100% of the time, 99% of the time. Some ads will be skipped 75% of the time. And so if you know that this one's going to be skipped less, then you choose to show it more frequently. And so what happens over time is if you turn up with a very, very, very bad ad, little shouty, annoying ad, and it gets skipped all of the time, you'll end up paying a higher price. You get allocated something through data. You get allocated a quality score which is lower. And so effectively you're charged more for that.
So the use of people's data and algorithms behind social media, and even going into technologies such as facial recognition, has come under a lot of scrutiny of recent. Everybody's really nervous about it. I suppose the film Social Dilemma, I suppose, shared with everybody that kind of what was going on in the background with some of that. Should we be worried about the use of the data and what that looks like?
Yeah, I think so. Probably, I would say it's probably something that should be regulated by governments, really. In truth, where I worked, we both at YouTube and Twitter, we didn't really have a lot of data. We didn't really have people's real names. We didn't really have what they bought, what they did. So we didn't have a lot of data there. But other platforms, specifically TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, they really did used to have a lot of data. It's changed a little on Apple phones in the last 6 months, to the extent that it's decimated the value of Facebook stock because their data has been so significantly reduced. It had a significant footprint before. And the critical thing I think we're learning with regards to a lot of other uses of technology, that we probably should regulate the way that these things have access into what we're doing, and we shouldn't leave it to the whim of billionaires, really.
Yeah, I find it interesting when you get the elderly gentleman in the White House grilling the youngsters and the young billionaires, and asking them, how they're using the data, and it's just, I suppose, a conflict of worlds. Really, it is quite amusing to see that.
Yeah, do you mean like a Senate intelligence or a Senate when people like Zuckerberg are having to testify at this in
Yeah.
the Senate? Is that what you mean?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
when those guys have been having to testify, it's just kind of quite amusing of the analogies that they use to each other, and they just live in different worlds.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think anytime any of the tech leaders have to testify in front of those committees of Congress, it's never impressive, is it? So absolutely, it gives you an indication that we probably need to do this in a more professional way, really.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Moving on to, I suppose, data, and I suppose that collection of data. Data breaches are the ultimate nightmare for I suppose, for any company these days. And I guess that there's a lot of work and a lot of discussions around data breaches. Do you think, in your mind, can organisations be more transparent about the risks, also, and be more proactive when the breaches occur?
So generally, our philosophy at the company that I worked was that we were fully transparent whenever it happened, and it was at the expense of causing share volatility. So our philosophy was anytime any breach happened, how quickly can we tell the market? It was basically the chief exec belief that full transparency all the time, and that way you earn trust. And the interesting thing is that after one of the breaches, we there was a brief cycle of bad coverage, and these were sort of broadly something like, oh, after something had been installed, about 100,000 users' passwords hadn't been stored in a double encrypted environment. It was something like that. There were brief breaches like that were hypothetical. They hadn't necessarily happened, but we were informing users and informing the market. And there was a little bit of coverage saying Twitter's outrageous for doing this. And then actually very quickly, a lot of the tech and the cyber security reporters said, actually, look, we can't criticize Twitter for being this transparent, because if we punish them for being this transparent, then there's no incentive for anyone following this high, rigorous, disciplined code that they do. So gives you an indication that you can do these things, even though you will be subject to criticism for the mistakes that have led into it. You can do something that will, on balance, be better perceived by the market.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of that noise recently with ransomware, where some companies have rumored to have paid the ransom as such to get their data turned back on, and then that clouds them with another load of sort of lack of transparency, and there's a lot of questions asked around that.
Yeah, what would you do though?
Me personally, I think you'd have to go out to your customer base and say, "We've been hit by a ransomware attack. We are." I don't think you can pay it, because if you pay it, you're just encouraging more people to do it, aren't you?
I suspect most businesses pay it, because the reputational damage that is involved in going out to a full set of customers and telling a full set of customers that you've been humiliated in this way. I suspect most organizations pay it, and they say, right, now we'll set about never being caught like that again. I strongly believe that's what happened. I was dealing with, I did some work with a London council that had suffered a ransomware attack, and they didn't resolve it in that way. But the consequence of it was that they lost access to all of their tenant ledger, they lost access to all of their housing register, they lost access to all of the information. And they actually, as a consequence of it, they switched to Chromebooks and effectively Google OS operating system to avoid future attacks. But it's just an illustration that effectively it's lose lose. The reputational damage of demonstrating to all of your customer base that you were caught snoozing and you didn't take these things seriously enough. But the amount of times that still now I see organizations and they've still got some Windows XP setups, or they've got dated solutions, or I go into a meeting room and something will pop up saying you haven't updated your virus protection. And it gives you an illustration that these things need to be taken far more seriously, I think.
Absolutely, and yeah, well, we know that some of the, particularly in the public sector, they like to sweat the assets, so that tends to have a lot to do with it, and it's probably a lack
Mm,
of investment more than anything, and probably education, and
absolutely.
education as well, which is key. And I suppose I suppose moving on into I suppose more into the sort of cultural side of what you do, and that side. I suppose companies like Google, Twitter are all highly innovative tech companies. They're there at the forefront, cutting edge. You'd expect them to be. company culture must be a huge part of the success of these businesses. Is it something that can be copied?
Yeah, well, firstly, it's really interesting that tech firms are associated with innovation. More often than not, really, I would see them from the inside as specialists in execution. If you look at Google, while you might frame them as innovative, almost everything that Google has accomplished since it first created Larry Page's reverse search engine, reverse sort of indexing. Everything it's done since then, it bought the way that it monetized that from another company. It bought YouTube from another company, Google Maps, Android phones, self-driving cars. It bought all of them from other companies. Um, it's ad business it bought from other companies. So what it is really is an execution business. And so that's why quite often, the one thing that did used to be celebrated all of the time about technology companies is that they move at an immense speed. I don't think it's necessarily true now. Most technology companies are actually fairly slow moving bureaucracies, but they are very clever at styling themselves as innovative when most of them aren't in the business of coming up with new ideas, and actually, to some extent, new ideas might be dilutive of the core business that we've got. So, yeah, it's very clever on that. So the critical thing I would say that technology firms need to project they've got a different culture to the outside world, because it's important for attracting top talent. So, the critical thing that technologies need to do is they need to attract new people to come and work all the time. They're often in an expanding mindset, trying to get more people in. And so as a result of that, the critical thing for them is being alluring and attractive. So that what they do is they present their culture as defined to the outside world, So that might be jelly bean walls. It might be sort of, uh, beautiful looking campuses, meeting rooms that look like movie sets. And, I think there's a focus on trying to look different in whereas in reality they're fairly similar to most jobs that you'd have experienced yourself.
So yeah, so it's meeting rooms, team calls, and all the rest.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I suppose the creativity comes down to that attraction of that talent, I suppose, to a certain degree.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, okay, interesting. And while we're talking about, I suppose talent, we're always being told technology is making us workers more productive. Um, but is it making us happier at work? And I suppose another question to flow into that is, and with employee well-being being central to success at the moment, um, what can we do to enhance happiness at work? And is there any science behind it?
Yeah, I mean, look, the really interesting thing is there is a number of things that directly correlate with our happiness at work. Some of them correlate with our happiness full stop. The number one way to be happier at work is to sleep more. And because it correlates with our happiness. Number two way to be happier at work is also a way to be happier in your life, and that's to have happier friends. The more we spend time with happy people, it seems to enhance our own happiness. When it comes to happiness in our jobs, well, actually, the probably the next biggest thing is adjacent to the previous one. The biggest predictor of whether you are motivated and driven in your job is whether you have a best friend at work. So that affiliation plays a really critical part in our connection to our jobs and how hard we work. Um, if we feel like we're in an environment where we really like and respect the people we're working with, we're probably more likely to put some incremental effort in. So those things, I think, they can play a part. You might then go and think a little bit further about what are the pillars of good organizational culture. One of them is trust, really, and that one of the ways you might frame that is that when you've got a trusting environment, people are able to speak up and give their opinions. I think we've all been part of a project group, whether it was at college, whether it was at work, where we think what this project group is doing is terrible, and what happens next plays a big part in whether you feel like you're in a trusting environment or an untrusting environment. If you feel like you look around and you think my opinion is going to be valued here, then you might speak up. If you feel like if I speak up here, people are just going to label me as a troublemaker and I'm going to get ignored. You probably won't speak up. That all of that is sometimes styled psychological safety, our ability to speak candidly to each other without fear of the consequence.
Yeah, interesting. I was actually at a cybersecurity vendors conference a few months ago, and there was a professor there, and he came up with quite a good sort of hack around that because obviously within organisations you've got introverts, extroverts, and different types. And the way he would try and get everybody engaged to speak up was to separate them into groups. And he would give them a stack of post-it notes. And instead of them having to say in front of everybody what they think, they could just write on the post-it notes, and then they'd get a team member to put them on the board, so that they didn't have to sort of step up and out, but they could still voice their opinion. I thought that was really
Right.
kind of really nice and simple, but it would encourage that sort of engagement, which I thought was quite good.
Yeah, absolutely. Although it's an indication that the culture is probably not necessarily welcoming
Very true.
um, of that sort of input. So, as a coping strategy, it seems like a good one. It's probably a signal that something's wrong, broader wrong. So, you might use that as an interim solution. If you were setting about a change manifesto, you might say, "Okay, um, right, we're going to use this as a way to elicit some feedback of what's going wrong right now. But long term, you can't use that as the cultural mechanism because it's effectively saying the only way we can get honesty is here is saying to people there's no consequence, and that broadly is a sign then that something's significantly wrong.
Yeah, and I suppose people can hide behind it as well. And I suppose pros and cons, which is great when I get opportunity to speak to lots of different people, take lots of people's opinions. It's always interesting to get that feedback. And I suppose
Yeah,
while we're talking on the subject of people, I know you wrote a book recently, book called Fortitude, and the term that's I think that's come out of the back of people talking about resilience in the workplace, and I think resilience, um, in technology is increasing. I suppose comes into that burnout. Everyone's talking about burnout these days, and that resilience to that. You know, is the technology that we use kind of responsible sometimes for that burnout? Because we've got hundreds of devices, we've got email on our phones that we're answering at 9 o'clock in the evening. So is technology helping that, or is it contributing to that?
yeah. I mean, it's worth looking in aggregate. Most people I speak to now who work in companies never knew an environment without email on mobile phones, and it's about 15, 16, 17 years since that really took place. But in that interim, in that sort of 16 years, the average working day increased by 2 hours a day, and it's it's worth putting on the record that during the period since the pandemic started, the average working day has increased by an additional 45 minutes a day. So we're in a situation now where, in aggregate, the average working day is about 2 hours, 45 minutes longer than it was before the start of email on mobile phones. And as a result of that, you might have said, you know, that the old 9 to 5, 9 to 6 was quite a slog. But now, if we're working 3 hours longer than that, it's no wonder that people are reporting feeling more burnt out than ever before. That we're surrounded with work, we can't escape work. Um, we're working longer and harder than ever before. And so absolutely technology plays a very critical part in what's gone wrong there.
I suppose that coming back into, I suppose, the social media bit, everybody is obsessed with LinkedIn these days. Making sure that they're up to date on who's left what businesses, who's joining what businesses. And do you think that's a bit of a distraction, or do you think it's is it something that's the way we're going, and we've just got to learn to deal with it?
I don't see the alternative, frankly. You know, sometimes people say, "Oh, is this good? Is this bad?" Okay, it's the reality of where we are right now, and you know, we're not going to uninvent the way that technology works. So, n- the, f- since time began, there's been people who've looked at the latest changes and developments and said, "Okay, well, if we can just uninvent that, then we'll be in a better place."
Yeah.
It's a charming idea, but I'm not sure where it gets us from where we are right now.
Yeah, no, I'm always a big believer in looking forward and trying to embrace the new technologies around. Hence the career that I've chosen. But yeah, absolutely, there will always be those people that look backwards and try and change the world. doesn't want to change at this particular moment in time, which is great. And I suppose again, there's something a really interesting topic. I've seen lots of stuff again on LinkedIn about it. Is that many tech organisations and probably some outside of tech have started to explore the 4-day week. Do you think that's a clever PR stunt, or are we all missing a trick with that?
Right now, the 4-day week is broadly a retention tool. So the companies that do it are doing it for productivity reasons. They're saying actually there's something about the never-ending spiral of work that we found ourselves in. It's a bit flabby, Actually, if we looked at our working week, would say with the average British person spending more than 20 hours a week in meetings,
Wow.
and I think most of us might be candid and say, most of those meetings, over half of the working week in meetings, most of those meetings aren't necessarily the most productive uses of time. So we find ourselves sort of doing a lot of these things that are bad uses of time. And the challenge for all of us is that, okay, well, what can we do then to make work better? Some organizations have said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to reduce the amount of days we work. So we're going to try and get as much done in shorter days. At the moment, there's very limited data on it. There's a major project that's going on in the UK that's about 70 firms. And at the halfway stage, half of them reported back and said that it was going well. The other half didn't report back. So we're sort of in a void. We don't know what's happening there. And, broadly, they said they were getting more done. The one thing we definitely do know that is if your firm goes down to a 4-day week, it proves increasingly hard to quit your job. The glory, time off is the new pay. The glory of not working on a Friday or a Wednesday means that uh, that's a big enhancement to your well-being that you don't necessarily want to trade off. So the moment the way that best way we can look at it is that it seems to be life enhancing for the people who do it. Worth saying that I chatted to one Australian firm that had introduced a 4-day week, and they told me one complication of the data was that the employees who'd gone down to a 4-day week, half of them didn't tell their partners they'd gone down to a 4-day week. So they were leaving the house on Friday morning, sort of waving to their neighbours and heading off to then play golf and have a long lunch. So, there's work still to be done there.
That's fascinating. That's hilarious as well. Yeah,
Yeah, it is.
that's brilliant. That is. I've not heard that story, so yeah, it's made me smell that out. But yeah, in terms of that, I suppose it's kind of I get I suppose the ability to give something back, but I'm just questioning that, when the companies do these trials of this sort of thing, you know, yes, it's going to work well because they're still in the honeymoon period, and because it's a trial, the staff don't want to lose it, so they'll probably up their productivity naturally to try and to make it work. Whereas if you would say, right, that's it, we're changing, then does that productivity start to fall off a cliff?
Yeah, exactly that.
Yeah.
Exactly that. And this is why it's sort of this is why it is such a hot topic where currently the debate and the data isn't good enough because, you know, uh, what will happen when firms go fully into this? Will we lose the initial benefit because now it's every day? I think this is the critical thing, really.
Okay. And I suppose another thing that I always think about is, creativity, it kind of organizations is really important, especially, if you're trying to innovate as a team and as a business. Um, where and what culture do you think we perform at our best in?
Yeah, this is such a big debate, really. The nature of innovation and where ideas come from is such a critical element. I was really struck. I think most of us associate innovation and creativity with being in the same room. And I was really struck during the pandemic. I saw J.J. Abrams, who's variously along the way been involved in Star Wars, Star Trek, and no shortage of huge blockbuster TV shows. And he was said, when the pandemic started, he said, "All right, I'm convinced that that's it now. We can't make anything for the next 3 months, 6 months, how long the pandemic lasts. And what he found was that actually you could, but you had to learn to do it differently. But the benefit he found by doing things remotely, you could get different people in the room who previously, if they weren't in West Hollywood, you couldn't necessarily get them there. So um, I think it sort of demonstrates that the origins of good culture and good innovative culture aren't necessarily what we aren't necessarily limited to what we see they are, but we need to they exist as mental models in our head. I think that we need to break out of a little
Yeah, and I think as well, I think these days a lot of talk, isn't there, about remote work and hybrid, and we've all had those conversations to death, and I'm sure you'll probably get that asked that question on a regular basis. And I think I'm a big believer. I can work from anywhere. I'm used to having to do it, especially pre-COVID. Airport lounge, customer premises, wherever I'd be, I can get on and do my job. Um, and I suppose sometimes that sort of creativity for me
bit.
comes in at, you know, it might come in the airport lounge because I'll see something that triggers something. Is that something that you see on a regular basis when you're speaking to people? Is that they're more creative outside of the workplace or at their desk, in an office?
I loved the idea. I saw another movie legend, Aaron Sorkin, who's done films like the Moneyball, The Social Network. He did the West Wing TV show. He's done so many different things. Famous for very zingy, witty dialogue, banter. And he realized he wasn't having his best ideas at his computer screen. He's having his best ideas in the shower. So he said, and you can check the quote on this. He said he'd had a shower installed in the corner of his office, and he has 6 to 8 showers a day. So I guess that suggests that our creativity might come when we step away from our spreadsheets and inbox, and we sort of allow our mind to wander a little, I think.
Yeah, and I do think that sometimes when you're trying to, I suppose, firefighting, as I call it, when you're firefighting in the office and you're in the role, that kind of your brain's in a different gear, isn't it? When you switch off a little bit and unwind, the brain does wander, and that's where I think
Mm.
I get most of my ideas in the evening or first thing in the morning, which drives some of my teams mad because I'll come in the morning and go, "Oh, let's try this or do this," and yeah, but that's the way it goes.
Exactly that. Ideas will catch you, uh, no matter what the time.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I suppose just as a some wind down, quick fire questions as we call it. I suppose one of the topics that I spend a lot of time speaking about is AI, machine learning as well. Um, is AI good or bad in the workplace? And I suppose are people frightened of it?
Yeah, I think we're only just getting the very sort of start element of it, and I suspect it'll start having a much bigger, significant impact. One of the ways I think we'll first see AI is helping to schedule meetings. At the moment, the sort of the pantomime of asking someone, "Can you do this time? Can you do this time?" Sending times over to people is one of the frictions of work. Downside of that, well, actually, that's one of the things at the moment that stops us having even more meetings. So when AI comes in, they'll be finding space for meetings in gaps that we never believed we even had. Um, and so, I think one of the most interesting, eye-opening elements of 2022 has been that anyone who's had an interest in the arrival of AI art tools and auto-generating art tools can't fail to be dazzled at times with some of what the capability is. And I think it's possibly going to be eye-opening on how these things will play a part. You know, in the same way that if you've used DALI or any of these tools and you've given a few prompts and you've got something breathtaking back, it's not impossible to imagine that you'll be able to say, "I need to write a letter to this client. These are the things. These are the bullet points. Please write it." And immediately this letter will be written, possibly in sort of more lucid language than we would have done ourselves. So these things are most definitely coming. I think the machine learning art tools demonstrate that actually this might be astonishingly high quality, and it could happen sooner than we think.
Great, yeah, that's, yeah, I've not thought of it in that way. That definitely tools to help us and support rather than be something to be frightened of. And
Yeah, well, if you look into the areas that are most likely to be undermined by AI, law is the number one area, because so much of law is pattern recognition. It's about, law is about saying, oh right, this case precedent on this, case precedent on that. At the moment, we use the very fallible system of human memory, and a lawyer's letter conjuring with some of those things and laying out a case is a very expensive use of humans' time. Good lawyers will cost £500 an hour, £1,000 an hour. A partner will cost even more than that. And so, one of the areas that is most likely to be impacted by AI is things like high margin, high value, but actually fairly repetitive work. And law sits right at the top of that. Accountancy sits second. So, I think we're going to see these things encroach into areas that maybe we hadn't necessarily considered to be most vulnerable.
okay, cool stuff. What's your favorite tech gadget?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like constantly, I love sort of anything to do with playing with location, really, and sort of anything that's going to enable you um, to use the area around you more willingly. But the thing that I've been really enjoying recently is just plant recognition apps. And if you've played around with these, you can hold a plant leaf or a tree or something up to your phone, and it will tell you. The app will tell you um, which plant it is. Which if you're either a nature lover and you want to identify what this flower is, or someone who just wants to add a bit of color to your window box or garden, they're dazzling. So I love these things. There's about 3 or 4 on my phone.
Wow. I tried one once and I removed it because it wasn't particularly good. And I,
Okay.
I'm one of these people that if you give the plant a little bit of a tug, if it comes out easily, it's a weed. Apparently, according to my wife, that doesn't work well because I managed to remove some of her favourite plants by using that strategy. But there we go. Such is life. Well, obviously conscious of time, so thank you very much for your time today, Bruce. Really interesting chatting. Spend hours talking about the right thing to do in terms of culture and employee engagement. Really interesting topic. Thanks for your time, much appreciated. Thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for listening to this episode of ASM Connected with guest Bruce Daisley. If you've enjoyed this episode, subscribe now to make sure you never miss an update, and check out other episodes in the series. To find out more about the team at ASM Technologies, visit asmtech.com. This is ASM Connected.